This is a breakdown of last week's episode on Israel Keys. If you haven't listened to that episode, you may want to pause this one and go back and take a listen, as we're going to be discussing the research and the timelines we went over in that episode today. This is the CTN Breakdown.
Today, we're discussing part 1 of our series on Israel Keys.
Welcome, Nerdlings, to tonight's CTN Breakdown. And if my voice sounds a little funny, it's because it does sound a little funny. I have a sinus infection.
Poor buddy.
So yeah, I'm going to power through this. But yeah, if I sound a little off, it's because I am.
Yeah. Aw, friend, you're doing good. You're doing good.
Yeah. So we've got an interesting breakdown to dive into tonight, as this is the first episode of our 4-part series on Israel Keys. We're going to try and stay focused on just the first part we covered in last week's episode tonight, as we will be breaking down each section with our thoughts and discussions for each part of the series.
Yeah, so these cases relating to Israel Keys are definitely one that you, Ash, that you've been wanting to cover since pretty much the beginning of CTN. I literally remember before even releasing an episode or going live, you and I having a discussion about eventually doing this. I think we had planned to do this far sooner than we actually ended up doing, but I think it worked out the way it was supposed to.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But yeah, I thought I had known quite a bit about this case and just like who Israel Keys was. You know, we live in Vermont. We were very unfortunately familiar with what happened to the couriers and things. So turned out I actually did not know nearly as much as I thought I initially did. After going just deep diving into this case over the last couple months and all of the different aspects of his personality and his history, I was kind of surprised about how many things came up that I wasn't aware of. I did find a lot of the research fascinating. It was just a lot of research in this.
Yeah, it was definitely a heavy research series. I mean, all of them are, but for this, it was a lot.
Yeah, this is our first series.
Yeah, it's our first series, and there were definitely nights where Nat and I were like, we're recording tonight, right? And then we're like,
We would procrastinate.
Let's wait for tomorrow, because it's a lot. It's a lot to unpack.
It's a lot to unpack. And it's dark. This guy's a monster. So it's pretty hard to dive into this and not come out feeling just sad and horrified by all of the events and everything that went down. It's really hard not to be mentally invested in this one.
Yeah. And you and I were actually reading the book American Predator.
Yeah.
During all this too.
Yeah, we both read that. What was it? What is her name? Maureen Callahan?
Yep, Maureen Callahan.
Yeah, the book I was listening to it on audio and reading it. So I was kind of flipping back and forth between the two. It's a fascinating read, so heavily recommend it for anyone who's interested in just knowing more about the case and what led up to his arrest, and really a lot of finite details that I myself had not been aware of. I think you read the book before I did.
Yeah, I read it probably about a year ago, I believe, and then since we were doing the episode, I kind of reread.
Yeah, because you were taking notes.
Yes.
But yes, so definitely we read the book. We both went through a lot of newspaper articles for this one. So, but we learned a lot. So.
Yeah. All right, nerdlings, let's break down the past of Israel Keys. So, as you know, serial killers often have abuse in their past, whether it be family members or not even family members, just people close to them. You see that often. And my burning question for you, Nat, seeing as we went through Israel's past, do you think his upbringing impacted his future development into a serial killer, or do you think he would have always been that way?
That is a good question. I personally do believe that people are born this way, because he didn't really go through a lot of trauma either, as far as I found. And maybe he didn't, it wasn't reported. It's very possible. But on the surface, I'll say, it didn't seem like he went through a lot of family trauma. He just was one of a lot of children. They definitely had a very fundamentalist Christian upbringing. And I definitely think maybe heavy on the rules and strict family life, for sure. I'm sure that helped mold him. 100%, I think it did. But I don't know if that made him a serial killer. I kind of lean towards no. I think he was a sociopath from birth.
Yeah, it's hard to gauge because when you think of, like I said, serial killers in the past, a lot of it was child abuse. But there are unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are abused that don't turn out to be serial killers. So
Right.
Yeah.
It's no excuse.
Yeah, and like you said, from the research we have done, we didn't see any child abuse.
At least physical abuse or sexual.
Yeah.
But, what happens behind closed doors, no one knows. But as far as what was reported, I didn't see a single thing about abuse when he was a child.
Yeah, and I wonder, because remember his neighbors, the Kehoes, they had turned into
spree killers.
Yeah.
Because they abducted a family. Yeah.
So I wonder. I mean, I don't know if that had a big impact. I'm sure it did.
Yeah, because they were I know the father for Kehoe. I'm blanking on his name, but he was part of the Aryan Nation. So it seems like that was definitely a heavy influence in that area that they had settled in at that point in time. Yeah, I don't know. I can't help but wonder if maybe like the relationship with those two boys, it sounds like they were a little bit older than him.
Yeah.
They would later grow up to become killers. So you do kind of have to wonder if maybe he learned it from them.
Yeah, it's tough. It's
a weird one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know on this one. I don't have a good answer.
Because like we said, there's not much about the past.
No, not much at all. And I think if the type of personality that Keyes had, I don't know if he necessarily would have talked about any abuse or anything like that growing up.
Yeah, that's true.
So he was, I don't know, he only told investigators what he wanted to tell them.
Yeah. So do we think it's possible he killed more than 11 people or even killed in more locations than he said? Because as you said, he liked to keep what he had to himself.
I go back and forth on that one. I really do. There are days where in this where I was like, nope, it's 11. I think it was only 11. And then there are days that I am like, oh, I think he lied. I think it's more. I'll be straight, though. I do not ever think it's less than 11, if that makes sense. Like, I do not think he was one of those serial killers that was kind of what's the word for it? I hate the way this works. But they boast about more killing more people than what they actually did. Mm-hmm. I don't think he was one of those. I think he legitimately did kill at least 11. I go back and forth on if it was more. I never think it's less. But what do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of in this, of course, in the same boat as you. Mm-hmm. Obviously you go online, you go on Reddit, Web Sleuths, and you see people talk about this. And there's a surprising amount of people that think he's lying about the 11 and actually think he only murdered the 3.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't know. I watched a lot of the, and I know you have too. We watched a lot of the
interrogations.
Yeah, the interrogations. Yeah. I don't know. He lied about a lot. Don't get me wrong. Like, he lied a lot. I actually think he did do at least 11. The only reason I go back to that, and I don't want to dive too deep into the reasonings behind that. I think it's something that we'll talk more about towards the end of the fourth, as we get towards the end of the series. But I definitely think 11 was a key number for him. I think he had a very set number in his mind. That was what he was going to do. And I think a lot of the things that led up to his final victim, I think, tie in with that personally.
Yeah, and I remember you talking with me about that, and I think you're on a good track with that. And yeah, long circle, but to answer your story, I believe it was at least 11. Mm-hmm. And do we agree that he didn't kill anyone while he was in the military, or?
See, I go back and forth on that one because, okay, so there's two things I go back and forth on. One, we know that Keyes already was capable of just rape and assault, which he did to begin with. So I definitely think not only are they looking for 11 murder victims, I also think that there's a heavy amount of probably unsolved rapes. I personally do not think it was just one. I think he assaulted many women. I think when he was away in the military, oh, man, I went back and forth on that one because supposedly he killed his first person before he went in, but then he goes 4 years without killing somebody. That doesn't really, I don't know.
Yeah.
It just, to me, it doesn't track. But, he was overseas in Egypt, which I'm from. If he was over in the Sinai Peninsula, that's a hard place to kind of get. It's nowhere near it's not in Cairo. It's nowhere near Alexandria. I think it was closest actually to Israel's Tel Aviv. So could he have murdered somebody in Tel Aviv? Possibly. I would be surprised by that. And I don't think he was there very long. I think he was only there for a few months. So I don't know. Maybe it's just that they were under such heavy watch because it's the military that he couldn't. I mean, he does have a lot of willpower.
Yeah.
Overall, he consistently kills 1% every other year. It's not every year for him. So I don't know. I go back and forth on that one. I don't have a good answer on that. Is the answer? I that's another one. I feel like that's my answer for all of these. I don't know. Yeah, I lean towards no. I guess that's where I'm going with today. I think it's a no.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about you?
I have a hard time believing he went so long without murder.
So you think he did?
Yeah,
I mean, it's fair. Unfortunately,
I do believe that if he didn't murder, he definitely, unfortunately, raped a lot of women in that time.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, he was probably doing something against somebody's will to control himself. I think, I mean, this guy is kind of bloodthirsty in a way. So, I don't know. I can see both arguments. I really can. I'm going to go with no.
Yeah.
Wow, this is a rare moment. We don't often disagree, but I totally think you're valid. And I could have been swayed. I almost was swayed, but I'm I'm going to go with no.
Yeah.
I'm going to stay with it. Ask me in 6 months, I might change my mind. But for now, it's no.
Yeah. So my next question for you, Nat. What do you think motivated him to drive to the locations he did? Do you think he had plans to kill in each and every one, or was it just on a whim?
I think, I'm having to think about this. I do think that wherever he went, he would mark out places that he was yeah, you know what? This is somewhere I want to come back to. And so I think those would be the ones that he would kind of put his kill kits or what have yous in. It's interesting that all of the locations that we know he murdered or confessed to murdering people, whether we know who the victims are or not, every one of those locations were places he had lived or had ties to in some form or way, with the exception of Vermont. But Ash and I were doing a bunch of checking on maps. And one of the things, that Ash had discovered was that he had this, what was it, a cabin?
Oh.
Or property in New York?
Yes, he had a cabin in upstate New York.
Yeah, and that was only a few hours from here. And he typically would fly into Boston. He would drive through Manchester. And then, of course, to get over to New York, the way he was going, he would come through Vermont. So he had probably traveled through here frequently. Again, same goes. His brother lived in Maine. So he would be traveling the opposite way. So he would be traveling upstate New York to Vermont, over to New Hampshire, up to Maine that way. So I'm not surprised that he probably had Vermont picked out in the past. I'm not. I think he does typically go where it may not seem like it. It seems like he goes all over the place. But I actually think he typically does go to places and murders people in places he's comfortable with or familiar with.
Yeah, I'm in that same vein. I also think Vermont is so vast and so...
It's rural. It's very rural.
There's a lot of places to cover, I guess. So if you want to drive to upstate New York, but you don't want to take the ferry...
Right.
Which I assume... Israel Keys would not, because there's probably cameras. They're tracking your transactions, whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Tickets.
There is a way around those ferries, and it's very, very much farmland the whole way.
Yeah, that kind of tracks with his past too.
Yeah.
He's one of those people. He's so comfortable in the woods and in rural communities. That was his hunting. I hate to use that term, hunting ground. Ugh, I hate that term. But that was his. What do you say it? his preferred locations. I think a lot of that, I think with Israel, for him, it wasn't so much about the people at all. He knew he was going to kill people. He didn't seem to have a victim type as far as we can tell. But I think for him, it was location based. So he would be like, I'm going to murder somebody in Vermont. I'm going to murder somebody in Texas or in Washington. Like, does that make sense? Like, it seems like a whim, but it's not. Like, I don't know how to explain that. But
Ooh, actually, Nat, I just thought of something.
mm,
Remember how you told me that you had read in places that Israel Keyes kind of looked up to Ted Bundy?
yeah,
So Ted Bundy was actually born in Vermont.
true. He was. And his mother, isn't it? He came back here to find out that his mother wasn't who he thought she was. It was his sister
Yeah.
who ended up being his mother, right?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So it is interesting. And then, of course, he's on the West Coast in a lot of the locations Bundy was. Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit there for sure. I noticed that with Israel. He had a, like, I don't know. Israel, he's a serial killer, so he's kind of terrible human being no matter how you look at this. He just is. But he had this like weird hero worship of other serial killers, which is deplorable and disgusting, but it's the mind of a serial killer, you know. This is not my views, but he seemed to have this like hero worship of certain ones. I know Ted Bundy was one. I think Jeffrey Dahmer, I could be wrong on that one, but like the typical serial killers that they're most notorious. And he would have books and stuff on them. So I'm not surprised. It does almost seem at times like he's modeled some of his behaviors after other serial killers, for sure.
Yeah, and
At least Bundy, for sure.
yeah, and maybe that was some reason why he came to Vermont. I don't know. Maybe it was.
Maybe.
I don't know. It's very hard to get into the mind of a monster.
Ugh. Yeah, you don't want to. That's for sure. But yeah, he definitely liked it. He liked Bundy for whatever reason. So yeah, that tracks.
So we know about his last few crimes before being caught, and we'll be diving further into those in future episodes. But focusing on Jesse's earlier crimes, Nat, do you think he used similar methods to what he would do later on?
I think he was starting to figure out what his methods would be early on. I think there are some things that kind of show up in this that definitely show up later on. For example, one thing that caught my attention was when he assaulted the unknown victim, the young girl. He specifically mentions that he had brought a knife with him. I found that really interesting because one of his victims for sure later on, he had brought a knife as well and had actually stabbed them. So we'll get into that a little deeper in the next or later on. But to me, that stood out. I could see where he was beginning to figure out like that was part of his process methodology. So I definitely see that.
Yeah, the only thing that really stood out to me was when he was younger, he would steal weapons and guns from neighbors, and he would actually have a hidden cache at his parents' house that he would put the guns and weapons in. So that's kind of like a really awful foreshadow into what is going to happen in the future with his kill kits.
Yeah, for sure. That absolutely was the other thing that came to mind was the secret cache, because that I believe I didn't mention it specifically in the episode, but his mother would actually later find that cache, and she would figure out pretty easily that Israel had stolen those guns and those weapons. And I think she had actually made him go and report or apologize to the neighbors for taking them. That's how it's known. But yeah, he definitely kind of had that secretive behavior of finding things. It's like he would take things he treasured and put them away somewhere. Like for him, he was a very big gun enthusiast and weapons enthusiast, even at a young age. So he would take those and they were kind of like his little secret stash and he would hide them. It makes sense in a way, because that would later lead to a very similar behavior he's doing in the woods. Wherever he's going, he's just leaving his weapons. It's interesting when you kind of start to tear things apart. You can actually almost see, not a pattern per se with him, but like a series of events that definitely led up to where he ended his life, I guess you could say. But with that, we're going to pause in this chapter of our breakdown of serial killer Israel Keyes. We will dive in deeper to the disappearance and subsequent murders of Bill and Lorraine Currier from Essex, Vermont next week. And we're going to be releasing a mini-sode midweek regarding one of the other assumed victims, Deborah Feldman, who was abducted April 9th, 2009. We did want to do a small, there's not much known on her abduction and assumed murder, but we did want to cover it. So we're going to do a small episode that will release probably sometime in the middle of next week. We wanted to just cover her case as well, just so that she'd not be forgotten. You know, that's kind of our rule. No victim is forgotten, and she mattered. So we do hope that folks will take a few minutes and listen to her episode as well. But with that, we will catch you next time, you crime